The name Don Knotts brings back memories of nervous stammers, bug-eyed glances, and a laugh that carried across generations. To millions, he was Barney Fife, that hilariously incompetent but lovable deputy sheriff of Mayberry on the Andy Griffith Show. Week after week, Knotts transformed clumsiness into pure comedy, giving television one of its most unforgettable characters. Over the course of his career, he would win 5 Emmy Awards, cementing himself as one of TV's most beloved stars. But the story of Don Knotts did not end with applause and laughter. Behind the comedic genius was a man deeply scarred by fear, anxiety, illness, and loneliness. His daughter, Karen Knotts, now in her 70s, has revealed intimate details of his private life, details that show the other side of the man the world adored. What she shares is not an attempt to tarnish her father's memory, but rather to complete it. For behind the lovable deputy was a fragile soul who endured a painful childhood, lifelong anxiety, broken relationships, and ultimately a battle with illness that even fame could not erase. Jesse Donald Knotts was born on July 21, 1924, in Morgantown, West Virginia. The youngest of 4 brothers, Don's arrival came at a time when the family was already struggling to survive. His mother, Elsie Lucetta, was 40 years old when she gave birth to him, while his father, William Jesse Knotts, was battling serious personal demons that made home life unpredictable and often frightening. Stability was elusive. The atmosphere in the Knotts household was tense, with William prone to fits of rage and erratic behavior. For a sensitive child like Don, this instability left deep scars. His 3 older brothers were much older than he was, and instead of serving as close companions, they often existed in their own worlds, leaving Don isolated. There was, however, one bright spot: his brother Sid. Sid had a natural sense of humor that could light up the darkest room. Don adored him, but tragedy struck when Sid died unexpectedly from an asthma attack. For Don, this loss was devastating. It was his first real encounter with grief, and the absence of the sibling he most admired cast a shadow over the rest of his childhood. Amid this turbulence, Don retreated into his imagination. He created a ventriloquist dummy named Danny, who became both a companion and comedic partner. With Danny, Don invented playful routines that distracted him from the pain and fear surrounding him at home. By the time he was in school, his classmates were beginning to see his comedic spark. He performed small sketches imitating people and weaving awkward humor into daily life. Though his peers elected him class president and loved his company, Don often felt like an outsider, a feeling that would haunt him even at the height of his fame. Karen Knotts would later explain that her father's nervous on-screen persona was not merely an act. It was a reflection of the anxiety he carried from childhood. Every laugh, every exaggerated twitch came from something real. Comedy was his armor, his method of transforming fear into connection. In making others laugh, young Don was protecting himself from the shadows that seemed to loom endlessly over his early years. Don's first attempt to make it in New York show business ended in failure. Crushed but not defeated, he returned home. The year was 1943, and with World War II raging, he enlisted in the United States Army. His assignment, however, was not on the battlefield but on the stage. He was placed in the 6,817th Special Services Battalion, a unit tasked with entertaining troops who were under constant stress. Touring the Pacific with a variety show called Stars and Gripes, Don discovered the full power of his nervous energy. Soldiers adored him not because he was heroic, but because he mirrored their own fears. His jittery body language, his anxious voice, and his exaggerated awkwardness turned fear into laughter, a gift that lifted spirits when they were needed most. By the time he left the Army in 1946, Don was decorated with the World War II Victory Medal, the Philippine Liberation Medal, and 4 Bronze Service Stars. But more importantly, he carried with him a sharpened stage presence and the realization that he had something unique to offer. The boy who had once cowered under his father's anger now had the confidence to command an audience. After the war, Don attended West Virginia University, graduating in 1948 with a degree in education and a minor in speech. On campus, he continued to perform, blending his ventriloquism with his natural comedic instincts. Around this time, he met Catherine Metz, a minister's daughter who became his first wife. In 1949, with only $100 in his pocket and Catherine by his side, Don returned to New York City to chase his dream once again. Success did not come easily. Casting directors found Don too awkward, too jittery for leading roles. But he persisted, taking small parts on radio westerns like Bobby Benson and the B-Bar Riders. Eventually, he landed a recurring role on the television soap opera Search for Tomorrow, where his anxious style began to find a home. By the mid-1950s, Don's persistence was beginning to pay off. He gained national exposure on The Steve Allen Show in 1956, where his man on the street interviews allowed him to showcase his signature nervous persona. For the first time, audiences saw his quirks not as flaws, but as comedic brilliance. That same year, Don reunited with Andy Griffith on Broadway in No Time for Sergeants. Their chemistry was undeniable, with Griffith playing the straight man to Don's bumbling corporal. This partnership would later transform both their careers. In 1960, Andy Griffith launched The Andy Griffith Show, and Don half-jokingly suggested he play the sheriff's deputy. Griffith agreed, and Barney Fife was born. The role fit Don like a glove. His twitchy expressions, exaggerated stammers, and wild physical comedy turned the bumbling deputy into a national treasure. The show was an instant hit. Audiences adored the contrast between Griffith's calm, wise sheriff and Knott's hyperactive, insecure deputy. Over the course of 5 seasons, Don's performance earned him 5 Emmy Awards, an unprecedented achievement. Yet behind the laughter, his personal life was crumbling. His marriage to Catherine Metz was falling apart under the weight of his long work hours, relentless anxiety, and growing dependence on prescription medication. After 13 years and 2 children together, the couple divorced. Karen Knotts would later admit that the public adored her father. But life at home was not easy. He was often consumed by worry, exhausted from performing, and emotionally distant. The man who made millions laugh often returned home drained and silent. In 1965, at the height of his fame, Don made a surprising decision. Believing The Andy Griffith Show was ending after 5 seasons, he declined to renew his contract and instead signed a movie deal with Universal Pictures. He dreamed of becoming a leading man. At first, the transition seemed promising. Films like The Incredible Mr. Limpet and The Reluctant Astronaut performed well, allowing him to headline. But audiences struggled to accept him as anything other than Barney Fife. By 1969, his career took a major hit with The Love God, a risque comedy in which he played a Playboy publisher. Audiences rejected it, and Don's confidence crumbled. All the while, his anxiety persisted. He often spent days in bed before performances, crippled by fear. The medication he had relied on since the 1950s became both a necessity and a burden. His anxious characters were not just performances, they were reflections of his own inner state. Through the 1970s, Don attempted to reinvent himself. He launched the Don Knotts Show, a variety program intended to showcase his range, but it was canceled after 1 season. He continued working steadily in films and television, eventually finding renewed success as landlord Ralph Furley on Three's Company in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Still, his sense of decline lingered. He was no longer the Emmy-winning star of Mayberry, but a supporting act. By the 1980s, Don's personal life was unraveling once again. His second marriage, to Laura Lee Suckna, ended in 1983 after years of strain. Around the same time, Don was diagnosed with macular degeneration, a disease that threatened his eyesight. For a performer who relied on expressions and timing, the possibility of blindness was devastating. Though surgery restored much of his vision, the emotional scars remained. His lifelong smoking habit had also taken its toll. By the late 1990s, Don was battling lung cancer. Though he had quit smoking years earlier, the damage was irreversible. Yet he kept his illness largely private, not wanting to shatter the image fans had of him. Amid this turmoil, Don found unexpected love. In 1987, while working on the sitcom What a Country, he met actress Frances Yarborough. Their relationship blossomed, and in 2002, they married. Frances later said she was drawn to his vulnerability, the way he could make the world laugh while privately carrying so much pain. Their time together was short-lived. By 2006, Don's cancer had spread beyond treatment. In February 2006, Don's condition worsened. Surrounded by family and close friends at UCLA Medical Center, he faced his final days with the same instinct for humor that had defined his life. His daughter Karen later recalled that even in his weakest moments, he cracked jokes so funny she had to leave the room, ashamed to laugh in front of her dying father. She later regretted it deeply, realizing that laughter was what he lived for and what he wanted to leave behind. Andy Griffith visited him in those final days, calling him Jess, a private nickname, and urging him to keep breathing. Though Don could no longer speak, he responded with a slight movement, acknowledging the bond they had shared for decades. On February 24, 2006, Don Knotts passed away at the age of 81. His wife, Frances, inherited his estate, but his true legacy was not in wealth. It was in the laughter he left behind. In her memoir, Tied Up in Knots, Karen shared the fuller picture of her father's life, the painful childhood, the lifelong struggle with anxiety, the loneliness behind the fame. She wrote not to expose him, but to honor him, to show that behind the lovable Barney Fife was a man of immense complexity and courage. Her words remind us of a profound truth. Those who make us laugh the hardest are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. Don Knotts embodied that paradox. To the world, he was the bumbling deputy who stumbled his way into television history. To his family, he was a fragile man fighting inner demons. And yet, through it all, he never stopped making people laugh, even in his final hours. That perhaps is the truest measure of his gift.